from your practice and from your own experience, things like that, what is a toxic family, and how does that look different to a healthy family?
And so I think within a toxic family system, it's extremely rigid and things have to be a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't allowed to be themselves. They often fall into one of those, into like a role that serves the system, but doesn't actually serve the individual. And so
Yeah.
that's where we find our hero, our mascot, our scapegoat. We see all of those different, the lost child, and then someone that's kind of enabling this system. And
Mm-hmm.
in order to break the system, in order to people have to start to make changes, and the
Yeah.
system has to become more flexible. Often, people within a healthier system, you feel seen, heard, and you feel like you belong. And the
Mm-hmm.
parents are open to feedback. I think
Mm-hmm.
within a dysfunctional system, you are not able to talk about things that you're not okay with.
Right.
I'm very grateful that as a kid, I could go to my mom and say like, "Hey, can you not like I could say what I was able to have a voice." And so I think
Right.
within a healthy system, even as a child, you're able to, especially the children are able to have a voice as well,
Right.
and it's not about control. I think
Right.
within those unhealthy and toxic systems, it's often very control based, and people aren't able to express themselves.
Mm-hmm. What One of the questions I get a lot is, do healthy families even exist? Because you get a lot of people who, when you're coming from a toxic background, people are justifying their behavior, that we just did our best, and you start hearing, you know, well, that's how I was raised, and you start hearing a lot of justifying of bad behavior, and sometimes people don't even have the opportunity to see what a healthy family looks like. So, do healthy families exist? And I know you kind of mentioned that, kind of mentioned what it looks like, right? But do healthy families even exist today?
So there's no such thing as a perfect family.
Right.
So within a healthy family, when an adult or when someone makes a mistake, they admit it and they
Mm-hmm.
apologize.
Right.
Within an unhealthy family, when the adult makes the mistake, they blame it on the child, or
Right.
they project their emotions on the children, or children are having to play roles that aren't age or developmentally appropriate. And
Right.
so I don't think that there's a perfect family, but I
Right.
do think that there are healthy families,
Mm-hmm.
because they are flexible and it's
Mm-hmm.
adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
Very so when someone comes in, I often ask about their childhood, and people will think, oh, it was good because none of those like big T's happen. But then we
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about some of those smaller things, like
Mm-hmm.
I was blamed and shamed,
Mm-hmm.
because I think sometimes patterns can happen within families
Yep.
where it's like for generations the moms and the daughters don't get along, or for
Right.
generations like the father and son just don't get along, and we have
Right.
to do something different to break those cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we, what's the starting progress to to start to break those cycles as we're adults, and we start to, I guess, for starters, how would we recognize some of the behaviors of the impact that it may have had on us? Like what type what side effects does that have on us as adults, that we can say like, oh, this is a symptom of what I went through?
I think one of the biggest things, especially if people haven't had children yet or aren't in a relationship yet, understanding that relationships don't fix things.
Right.
Children, it's not, because I know people, the child was to fill a void, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not the role of children. Like we
Right.
have to address those wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Children are there to take. Like
Yeah.
they need, like
Mm-hmm.
we are there to give to them.
Right.
And so I think making sure as the parent, doing my own work. If that's reading a book, if that's going to therapy, if that's taking some classes or coaching, making sure that I'm addressing those wounds.
Yeah.
Because I've seen people go to the opposite end, where if their parents were really, really strict, then they're really, really permissive. And it's like, okay,
Hmm.
we have to, there's a middle.
Right.
Because kids need, they need boundaries, and they also need love. And we have to
Yeah.
find ways to kind of walk that middle ground.
Hmm.
But I think acknowledging some of those things, because I've seen people unconsciously repeat some of those patterns,
Hmm.
um, and but they weren't really aware of it.
Right. Absolutely. And what does it look like in terms of relationships? Because one of the things we talked about all week long was that we mirror our adult relationships after our childhood and after our parents. What does that look like with relationships?
So within relationships, because often it's a little bit better. So if my parent was really dismissive, this
Hmm.
person might, but there's still this dismissive quality,
Hmm.
but it might not be as bad. And
Hmm.
so I do think that doing uh acknowledging some of those triggers. So triggers is where, because if I put lemon on my hand, it won't
Yeah.
hurt because I don't have a wound.
Yeah.
But if I have an open wound and I put lemon on it, it's gonna be ouch. And so
Yeah.
realizing that some of those triggers that might be a sign of a deeper wound, of a deeper concern. And I think being accepting that I may never get closure within that parent child relationship. My
Hmm.
parent may never change.
Hmm.
And then being healthy enough to walk away from something that's bad,
Hmm.
from something that's toxic. I know a lot of people that are afraid to be alone. They don't know who they are
Yeah.
outside of
Hmm.
a relationship. And so I really stress the importance of, between major relationships, you got to heal.
Yeah.
Because you have to take time to heal in between. um, because I've seen people end up in very similar situations that
Hmm.
they just came out of.
Right. How do you know when it's time to distance yourself from your family? I think that as much as we talk about setting boundaries and walking away from toxic relationships, I think that people actually, at least when I work with people, it's as difficult it is to walk away from a romantic relationship, and then they start to unwind and they start to put these pieces together that, like, oh man, this is going deeper than what I actually thought, and they start to see certain patterns with their family. When do you know that it's time to distance yourself from your family, possibly cut them off? Maybe I always call it the thermostat, where you start to adjust the temperature, or maybe you're not completely cutting them off, but you can start to turn down the heat of quite a bit and not spend as much time with them. How do you know when it's time to do that, and how what's that gauge?
I think if you gauging how you feel when you're there.
Hmm.
How long does it take you to recover from a visit, from a conversation, from a phone call?
Yeah.
I talked to someone, and their family member would call them at all times of night. Just
Yeah.
would constantly, and it wouldn't be a crisis. It wouldn't be
Yeah.
anything major. And so we talked about, can you set a boundary of putting your phone in do not disturb mode?
Hmm.
Like, just from this time to this time, my phone just doesn't ring.
Yeah.
Your children are home. And it was something that they could turn on and off if they did need to be available for a
Hmm.
crisis. But I think I think we have to acknowledge that sometimes a trauma response can
Hmm.
be that people pleasing, that
Yeah.
fawn response, where I don't want to
Hmm.
make them mad.
Yeah.
That can be a survival response.
Hmm.
So is my difficulty setting this boundary, is that coming out of the fact that I I'm scared. I'm
Hmm.
worried that if I set this, that they won't be there. Because
Yeah.
I think the higher that and if that's actually true, if my
Mm-hmm.
family really will not be around me, if they won't have a relationship with me, if they can't have unlimited access to my
Right.
time, money, that's not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned a little bit earlier today that sometimes we accept things from family that we wouldn't accept from other people.
Right.
And I think family should be the safest relationships that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, and if you see that the person is trying to work on it,
Mm-hmm.
are they making any steps, or are
Mm-hmm.
things getting worse? I love how
Yeah.
you talk about that often people that have certain toxic traits, sometimes it gets worse as
Mm-hmm.
they get older.
Yeah.
They dig in deeper into
Mm-hmm.
some of those things, and that it's okay to prioritize self-care. That self-care
Right.
isn't selfish. Part of my own self-care when I go to visit particular family members is I make sure to get my own place so I can leave.
Yeah.
If
Mm-hmm.
I'm uncomfortable, I can go. We have a family trip planned, and some of my family, they use some language that I don't use around my child. And so I said,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if y'all are using that language, we're going to go.
Right.
And but what you have to do is, if that happens, you have to actually go, or
Yeah.
else your word isn't. They're like, oh, like they
No.
don't really mean it. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to do that. You have to be willing to do that.
Yeah, I tell people it's okay to go late and leave early when you know that it's those type of situations. Go late, leave early. The other thing that I tell people is that you can be involved in the event without actually being involved, where you feel like you're that sitting duck, and where you can help out the host. You can help take out the oh, I see the garbage needs to be taken out. Go take out the garbage. Help serve people, and so you're active and you're present, but because you're so busy, like you're not this sitting duck where people are able to just pry and gossip or whatever the situation is, or to pick on you, or to be critical or harsh towards you. And so those are some ways I've talked to people about kind of easing that tension over a little bit.
And then also that we can get used to the chaos and drama,
Mm-hmm.
that where peace becomes uncomfortable.
Yep.
So I think sometimes people consciously are like, I don't want this.
Yep.
But then every time the person calls, we're answering the phone every single time, but we know what's going to happen. Like
Mm-hmm.
we know.
Yep.
I work with someone that's constantly looking for a fight. Like they're
Yep.
like, oh yep, I was in fight mode. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
I answered. I knew I was
Mm-hmm.
looking for that fight. And so
Yep.
it's like, okay, towards your healing, we have to make different decisions if we
Mm-hmm.
want a different outcome.
One of the things I've told people in situations like that is I've then, and same with me, certain family members, I don't answer the phone when they call. I always call back. Certain people I always call back, but I don't answer when they call. But I always call back, and so that helps you, because like you said, you know what to expect, right? You know what's going to happen when you pick up that phone, whether it is that person that's looking for information to try to gossip, whether they're calling to pick a fight, or whatever the case is. You know what to expect. So a lot of times, and you feel that fight or flight start to pick up, that anxiety, that panic start to rise. And so just don't pick up. And then, but if it's not someone that you're completely done with or whatever, call them back. And quite often, especially if you give it 24 hours, like quite often, whatever it is that they were calling for, right, that their tension has also dissolved. Quite often they forgot the reason why they called, right, that fight or that tension or that gossip. And then you can actually have a lot of times a cordial conversation. Not all the time, but a lot of times.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Talk about one of the things that I hear a lot um, when people are dealing with toxic family members or have childhood wounds is this feeling of guilt, this overwhelming feeling of guilt. It's one of the things that I know that it's basically one of the telltale signs that someone has had, a toxic or traumatic childhood. Number one, why is that, and what do we do about that feeling of guilt? Because that feeling of guilt, I think really gets people to make decisions that they know. Quite often they know that this decision, I don't want to do this, but I also don't want to feel guilty for making this person mad or whatever the situation is.
And I think that goes back to some of those early childhood experiences, because I've worked with people whose parents as from as young as 2 or 3, they were expected to take care of the parent's emotion.
Yeah.
If they didn't, they were shamed, blamed, you know, don't make, you know, they were walking on eggshells at a very, very young age. And that wires your brain to work a little bit different. And so correcting that and kind of being able to tolerate that discomfort. So I think there's a difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is me feeling like, okay, oh, I regret, oh, my that person called and I missed their call. Whoops. Oh yeah, I said I was going to be available and I totally forgot. I would feel guilty about that.
Yeah.
But that shame is like, you're a bad daughter if you don't
Yeah.
answer. You're a bad person if you don't. So I like to distinguish between the two, because I think a little bit of guilt can like help me. Oh, you know, I know that was really important to that family member. I'm going to make sure that I am available. I did actually do something wrong, because a lot of times people are feeling guilty for things, but it's within a toxic system that a healthy system would not expect. So I have a 4-year-old. My 4-year-old, I don't expect him to make me happy. I don't expect him to not make me angry, because my emotions are mine. He can't like I don't put my emotions on him. And there are times he does things that are like, oh my gosh, but he's 4. He's supposed to do those things. And then also I've said I'm going to get, like, probably by 6, he'll have his own therapist. Because I think we often think that, oh, if I'm in therapy or if I'm getting help, that means there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
No, just like I'm gonna need, as a child psychologist, I can't be a therapist to my child. He's gonna need his own person. And so I think being open to those things, I think, can help set people up for better things. And if we can distinguish, that's not guilt, that's shame. Like you're feeling like a bad daughter. You're feeling like a bad son. You're feeling like you're not living up to their expectation. Is their expectation yours? Like, is
we
that
talked about that this week with conditions of worth. That if you don't that they have this quite often unrealistic expectation of you, and when you don't live up to that expectation, right, you feel like you're not worthy of their love. You don't feel like you internalize that as that I'm not worthy because I can't live up to this person's expectation, and then it leads to just starts to go down that rabbit hole. But quite often in toxic families, you find out that that's a double bind, because even if you did quote unquote meet that expectation, you really didn't, because they're still going to find other ways to criticize. Going back to what you mentioned earlier about the control.
Because it's either never enough, or if it is, it's to put somebody else down.
Yeah.
So maybe you're the golden child. Maybe you're the one that doesn't do anything wrong, but you showing up in that way, meeting every expectation, now they're going to turn on another family member, which normally the person feels guilty about. Like, oh, I feel bad that you're comparing me, like I'm to my sibling, because I've seen people feel guilty about that. And then also, I think a piece of that guilt can sometimes be grieving what they didn't get. And kind of, as people realize, wait a minute, because what you and I call toxic, that was their normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, like, as people come out of that, it can be a bit jarring to realize what I've been accepting. Oh, everybody's parent doesn't. No, like that's not typical.
No. Can you talk a little bit about the golden child and scapegoat, and just the different roles that people play when it comes to family dynamics?
Yes, and so within a dysfunctional family system, because even within a healthy system, there can still be roles, but these roles, the child finds the role, and it's not rigid. The person doesn't have to do this. So I like to start with the hero, because that is the hero or the golden child. They're the one that's perfect, and within the family system, they're often the reason the parents say, oh, how could I be a bad parent? Because look at, like, if this, how could a bad parent have a child that has all A's and, went off to this college? And it's like, no, like that's, like that doesn't mean that the family was healthy because one person made it out okay.
Yeah.
And
One thing I think is interesting about the hero child that I think a lot of people should hear is that the hero child feels like that's their role, and they do that to protect the toxicity of the family. They're actually enabling the behavior unconsciously quite often, but right, but they're doing it because if I can have straight A's, if I can be this great athlete, it deflects the image of the family. They quite often they know what's going on, but it also applies a lot of unnecessary pressure to that child as well.
and they often have a fear of failure
Mm-hmm.
and can grow up as an adult. They can be at risk of having codependent relationships where they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to fix that
Yeah.
person, or that
Yeah.
as a parent they become the one that enables
Mm-hmm.
this dysfunctional system.
Yeah.
Um, and so then the scapegoat, they're
Mm-hmm.
the opposite of the hero. That's the one that normally has the behaviors. That's the one that normally ends up in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
They're often described as, the bad child, or the child that has a lot of issues. But the family is putting all their emotions on that child.
Yeah.
When parents within high conflict relationships, I've seen that child will start to have issues when the
Yeah.
parents argue, because
Mm-hmm.
it takes the pressure off the parents, and now the parents come together to address the child,
Yeah.
and kind of and now the parents aren't focusing on one another so much, which
Mm-hmm.
is why I really talk about the fact that, and thank you for duetting that one, that staying
Yeah.
does not that's not always best for the kids if nothing is
Mm-hmm.
going to change. If the relationship is going to stay the same, y'all are still going to yell, cuss, throw things. Like, if this is an unhealthy relationship, that does have a negative impact on the kids.
Yeah. One thing that I see people in my comments asking, I was going to ask this question
Yeah.
as well. Is it possible for someone to be both? Someone can be the hero child and the scapegoat child, or for it to flip flop over time. What does that look like, and why does that happen?
So I've sometimes seen one parent see one kid as the hero, and the other parent see that same child as like the scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, within a dysfunctional system, the role that the child has fits the needs of the parents. I've also seen people that are only children sometimes play multiple roles,
Mm-hmm.
or as the scapegoat, as the hero gets older,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if they leave the system. So if they go off to
Mm-hmm.
college, or if they get married, or are
Yeah.
in a committed relationship, that sometimes the family can turn on them and then
Mm-hmm.
have a new hero. Or
Yeah.
if a new child comes, and you know babies, but now this child transitioning into high school starts to have
Right.
some issues, and so sometimes the family shifts. And so
Yeah.
I have seen people identify with more than one role.
Yeah. I know I've seen where someone has either the hero or the scapegoat has broken away, or maybe the scapegoat has broken away, but then has now become very accomplished in their own right after doing, like you said, going to therapy. And then all of a sudden, the family wants to circle back and oh, look at this great child that I produced and that sort of thing. And then the hero, who may not be as accomplished as this new hero, right, becomes the scapegoat, or vice versa, or the hero. It's like, you know what, I'm sick of this. I'm tired of taking care of everyone. I'm finally going to start to focus on myself. I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to become self-aware. Then quickly they become the scapegoat, very quickly.
Yes. And then another one that I see a lot is the clown, or the mascot, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the one that uses humor to when things are high conflict. And a lot of comedians, entertainers, a lot of high profile people. Will Smith has talked about kind of playing this role, and
Mm-hmm.
having difficulty coming out of that. That when conflict happens, they want to joke and laugh,
Yeah.
and maybe use sarcasm or use humor to
Mm-hmm.
to deflect, but that doesn't actually solve the problem
No.
is still there. And so the person doesn't learn how to actually deal with conflict,
Mm-hmm.
because yeah, we all laugh and we were distracted for this moment, but there's still, that issue is still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's one question I have is that do these roles, do they fit in terms of, like, let's say there are three children. Is it typical that the older child is the golden child and the hero, or they typically the mascot, or how does that usually work out?
And I think it can depend on the qualities of the child. I know within my own family, my mom was kind of the hero, but that was because her older brothers, they would play around a lot and they weren't
Yeah.
particularly responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And then if a child maybe gets a diagnosis of ADHD or depression, like if a child ends up with a diagnosis, I've
Mm-hmm.
seen them sometimes shift to the scapegoat,
Mm-hmm.
because or families really try. Maybe they don't get the hero tested, and the
Mm-hmm.
hero might have undiagnosed um, some concern that
Yeah.
they're fighting through and struggling with, but the family doesn't want a diagnosis because they don't want um, to feel like there's anything going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how does your our upbringing, how does that lead to attachment issues? And there's a lot of talk about attachment styles. And I know you and I talk about attachment styles on my podcast. How does that how, how are those related?
So attachment, so a secure attachment is where it comes out of my caregiver
Mm-hmm.
meeting my need. Were they
Right.
consistent, and were they timely in meeting my needs?
Right.
And so what I've seen is people with an anxious attachment style where they don't really want, when conflict happens, they need distance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they were often left to manage their needs themselves, and
Yeah.
people, maybe they couldn't go to an adult. Maybe the adult would get upset if they were having a concern and they had to hide their emotions. And so attachment impacts how we relate to others,
Yeah.
and how when people are trying to show care, show love, give help, what's our response, and what's our response in conflict.
Yeah.
So, because conflict is okay, like conflict is normal. No,
Healthy. Yeah.
every
One of the
every
things that we talk one of the things we talk about is that it's actually necessary in a healthy relationship, because that's actually showing you that both people are being authentic when you're not avoiding conflict, and you can actually have good healthy disagreements. The key is to be able to do that without disrespecting the other person.
and that it's okay if during the because I've had conversations with my partner where it's like, okay, I need a minute, and to
Yeah.
take a minute, that's not an avoidant. It's like,
No.
okay, I need to calm down, and then we come
Mm-hmm.
back and we're able to finish it. And that's where within a healthy relationship you have those you're able to communicate those expectations. You're
Mm-hmm.
able to talk about these things in a healthy way, and the
Yep.
person doesn't we're not intentionally pushing one another's buttons.
Yep. Mm-mm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna take some questions, and you're I don't know if you have questions on your end or whatever. We can take questions from people, but before we get into questions, curious to know any books that you would recommend for people. I
Yes,
know you're a big reader like I am.
I am. And so I really like adult children of emotionally immature parents. And I've been out to your site, and anytime I'm looking for books, because you have like a
Mm-hmm.
huge book list on
Mm-hmm.
on your site that I've used.
Mm-hmm.
I also like Trauma Proofing Your Kids by Peter Levine and Maggie Klein. I have a book. My book is Turning Crisis into Clarity: How to Survive or Thrive in the Midst of Uncertainty. And so those are some of the ones that I've been focusing on right now. I also love Brene Brown, her Atlas of the Heart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
I
waiting.
haven't read that.
Yes, Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart. Surprised I don't have it right here.
Mhm. I'm writing those down because some of these I need to add to that
Mhm.
list. Some of them I need to read myself. I know you and I are both big fans of Whole Again.
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
yes. And I like audiobooks. So I think people, because if someone isn't a big reader, I normally check out the sample to see if I can tolerate the voice for 2
Mm-hmm.
hours. But audiobooks, because I'll have a lot of people say I don't have time.
Yeah.
But they have a 15-minute commute to work, or they have a 20, 30, 45-minute commute to work, where they could, listen to something. And so taking time to do that. And somebody asked me the book by Maggie Klein. It's Trauma Proofing Your Kids. It is phenomenal, because what it says, kids are going things I can't my child is going to experience, my child is experiencing COVID right now, not COVID, but like he doesn't have it, but kids are going to have things that happen, and we have to be able to prepare them to deal with it in a successful way. And the last book, Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart, is her brand new book.
This is a great question. What does a healthy relationship look like with a child?
I think a healthy relationship, and we're talking about child versus teen, because so parenting a teen is totally different than parenting a child. And so but the foundation I lay early on can kind of help later on. But I think letting my kid know that it's okay to make mistakes. So last night, my son spilled like a whole cup of water, but my husband gave him like an open cup, and he's 4. So like he bumped the cup, it spilled. All right, go on ahead and get the paper towels. He got the towel, he cleaned it up. It wasn't, why would you do that? You know what? He's 4. I know exactly why. And so I think a healthy relationship is one that the root of it, especially within my discipline, that I'm focusing on, I'm connecting with them, and then I'm correcting, because children let me know that they're not okay with their behaviors. And we have a crisis right now with mental health with kids. We've been in this whole panini press for so long. And so making sure that if I'm seeing something with my child, that I'm checking in with them. I know there was a time our child was having some issues at daycare. And when I talked to him, we found out that there was a kid that was bullying him. But if I was just focused on the behavior, don't do that behavior, stop the behavior, but didn't talk to him about, hey, what's going on?
We do that because it's a reflection on us. We just want them to stop the behavior because we don't want the image of being a bad parent. It's about external validation, rather than digging in deeper of what's the reason why. Because children express themselves very differently. And that's something that people have to grasp and understand. And that's the reason why conscious parenting is so vital and so important. I didn't mean to cut you off, but go ahead.
No, but that was perfect. And then do you remember the author of Whole again? Because someone asked, what books do you recommend for someone who wants to heal holistically? And I think Whole Again.
Yeah, Whole Again is literally just slipped my mind, but I can look it up. Jackson McKenzie.
Perfect. Can I do a question on this end?
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
good. How did two parents who parent differently find balance? And that's where, if you're able to have a conversation and talk about it with just the parents, if we're able to get closer on the same page. I don't like to use the word manipulation with children. I feel like kids are they're supposed to get over on one parent. They're supposed to play y'all against each other. Like that's just, but if I'm communicating with my partner, if I'm able to do that in a healthy way, there are lower chances of that. And so I think communication can be key. And then if I'm not able to have a productive conversation with the person, I have to let go and focus on what I can control. So if we're in 2 different households, I love talking about parallel parenting, where it's okay, what happens in their household, I don't have any control over it. As long as it's nothing, legally abusive in my state, I have to let some things go.
I get that question. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I get that. I get a lot of questions about that, especially when you have a split household. And a lot of times parents are concerned when one parent is the fun parent, and it becomes this tit for tat where it's this competition of which child loves me more. And really, and going back to something that you said, we're there to give to the child, not the other way around. And I tell parents to be yourself. Even if you are not the fun parent who's taking them four-wheeling every other day and that sort of thing, it doesn't mean they love you any less. And quite often, we don't look at, and a lot of times it comes from codependent traits, that we don't think that we're offering the child, we don't have anything to offer the relationship. So I always compare it to, let's forget narcissistic and divorced homes and that sort of thing. Even in a healthy home, you typically have one parent that is a little bit more loose and a little bit more fun. But let's say that you have that parent that sits you down at 8 years old and teaches you how to do taxes, right? At 8 years old, you're kind of frustrated at that, like, why do I have to do this? But then, right, you find the value in it as you get older. And so you still love both parents equally, one for the fun, one for the structure, and you see the value in both. And so when you find yourself in that position, you want to look inward at what is it that I'm trying to receive from the child? Like, what validation is it that I'm looking for? Why do I feel like I don't have any worth in this relationship? And then begin to be thankful for, like, what legacy that you're actually leaving with them. If you are a little bit more structured, and also, but also you can look and what is it that I'm envious of with that other parent? Do I need to kind of loosen up the reins a little bit if they're the fun parent? Could I have a little bit more fun, right? While still being myself, while still being authentic, not in a tit for tat, not in a, but maybe I could take them out for ice cream a little bit more often. Maybe we could bake something a little bit more often and have a little bit more fun. Or maybe on the flip side, is typically, people are envious of the fun parent. But if it's the other side, the other way around, where I'm so sick of them, or they never let them have any fun. Well, maybe you could have a little bit more structure, right? We're not trying to be like them, but maybe we can turn the dial just ever so slightly, right? And find that compromise, so then the child has a little bit more consistency between both parents.
I see that a lot when one parent has the child during the week and the other parent has the weekends, that the weekends is kind of the fun part, and then the weekday. And so I like how you talked about building in, how can we build in some fun during the week? How can we max, instead of looking at what I can't control? Okay, so this is what is with them. And this is something that I would like to do. And I like how you said to not kind of go back and forth, because I've seen people try to control through the children when they could no longer get to the other parent. They start to kind of do things on purpose to kind of get at the other parent.
One of the things I always tell people is that we can always be happy for the child too, right? If they're excited about the fact that they're going to get to do these things, right? Let's look at it from, because really it's about them. And if they're excited, like, why can't we be excited for them, right? Rather than trying to control and trying to dictate, right? Because ultimately it's not about you. And allow for them to develop these memories, allow for them to develop to have fun, and to be excited, to allow for them to be a child, right? And because quite often it's not um, quite often it's not going to hurt as much as what you might think, right? And quite often it's really about your own internal validation than it is anything else. Someone asked, what books would you recommend on parenting teenagers? Do you have any? Yeah, you mentioned earlier that there's a difference between parenting teenagers. What about troubled teens, and when you start to have unruly teenagers, maybe a little bit more than just your normal rebellion? What happens there?
And that's where I really would partner with a therapist too, because I'm really concerned, because sometimes your child might be dealing with depression, there might be some anxiety, there might be something deeper going on. And so I do think in giving them a healthy outlet, because teens do not want to listen to their parents. So you can try to lead and guide them till you're blue in the face, and then the parent brings them to me as a therapist, and I'm like, oh, let's work on your self-esteem. And they're like, yay. And the parent has been trying to get them to work on this for so long. And so I do think that if you can find someone that is the right fit, or, what are they good at? What are their activities? But as a parent, so about the preteen years to teen, you really have to let go of some control.
Yeah.
Like you have to let them become, because it's like, oh, well, I'm super focused, hyper focused on they have to have straight A's because they have to go to college and they have to do this. But I'm like, that parent is stressing themselves out. And this kid wants to fix cars, wants to do, and so I think I'd like to watch control at that point. Because the kids are going to push against, because I want to set those boundaries with those important things, with those safety things. And then let's not fight over,
what you want to be when you, your grades, what do you want to be, where do you want to work? Because they don't, society's not, they're not going to want to, they're not likely going to want to just not do anything with their life, right? There's going to be external factors, right? When they start dating, when they start meeting people, when they, that are going to let them see like, oh, I need to start catching up with people.
Yeah. And not protecting them from natural consequences. And so if my 17-year-old didn't do his English project, I'm not, and it's a typically developing, like there aren't any other major concerns. I'm not stressing myself out emailing the teacher. It's like, hey, reach out to your teacher and ask. Like, I think starting to teach them how to advocate for themselves and teach them how to do some of those things. And then as a parent, I can have expectations where it's like, okay, in order to go out on the weekends, you can't have any missing assignments.
Yeah.
So I still have a boundary in place. They're not, running loose. But for book recommendations for parenting teens, someone asked on this side, how is the sibling dynamic affected by the golden child and the scapegoat? And so, like, if one sibling, I often find that there's resentment between the golden child and the scapegoat. They often butt heads. Because they're aware of the different pressures, the different expectations, and I think in healing that, because the scapegoat is often in a lot of pain, and the hero is actually in some pain. They're often parentified. They might not get as much attention or support. The scapegoat is likely getting a lot of the parents' attention, and so I think sometimes, if both parties are open to having a conversation, it can start there. But the book for teenagers, Dan Siegel has one called Brainstorm. Brainstorm: The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain. It's called Brainstorm. Daniel Siegel. He has great parenting books, because there's a lot of development that's happening in those teen years, emotionally, hormonally. Like there's a lot going on, and it just talks about how to kind of support your child through it.
I have a question over here on this side, and I want to expand this question a bit, but this person is asking, my son misses my parents. They had a good relationship, so how do I help him understand why I cut them out? And I kind of want to expand that to major changes. When you're trying to explain major changes, divorces, if a mom or dad cuts out the child, because we, on my end, a lot of my people, a lot of my followers deal with that, where once there's a divorce, one of the parents just completely exits. But just overall major changes, or in this situation where you had to make a decision to cut out unhealthy parents.
And Matt and I can't know exactly what your situation is. I would caution, because sometimes I've seen there are issues, and depending on the age of the child, is there a way for them to be in their life in a healthy way? And there might not be, because sometimes what I've seen is mom and grandma have it going, like they
Mm-hmm.
have an issue, if it can be healthy, because I've seen people cut it off because it's an issue between the adults, and
Mm-hmm.
really the child really isn't
This
in
person said in this situation,
it.
he's 9 and they're alcoholics.
Okay, yeah, so that's unsafe, and so
Mm-hmm.
um um uh Alanon, I think it's is it Alanon? I forget, but there's one for families of people
Mm-hmm.
that have alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's really affecting them at some point, maybe, figuring out a way to maybe have that conversation. There's a book called The Elephant in the Room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a workbook for kids, but you could look at it and see if there's any language in there that kind of might be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
If it's bad, because I've seen kids, they're aware. They know that
Mm-hmm.
when grandpa drinks too much, he starts, like sometimes if the child is aware of it, sometimes
Yeah.
you can have an age appropriate conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's about safety. Like,
Yeah.
why can't I? Don't argue for long periods of time with kids. like
Yeah.
it's about safety.
One of the things I always tell people is that some things we don't actually need to fix. We're not trying to fix the child. We need to allow for the child. What is the child doing? They're grieving.
Yeah.
We actually need to teach the child how to grieve. Unfortunately, this is not going to be the first time that this child is going to grieve. So we have to teach them what grief is like and how to process their emotions. What happens when we have to let go of someone that's unhealthy? What happens when, because at some point in time, your 9-year-old is going to be a 19-year-old and they're going to go through breakup. Guess what? They're also going to go through grief, right? And then they're going to experience the pain of someone passing away at some point in time. So these are life skills that need to be developed. And this is just kind of a point right now where, yeah, you're keeping them safe, but those feelings and those emotions that they have, they're real. So instead of trying to fix them because they're going to feel like there's something wrong with them, start to teach them how to unpack and start to teach them some emotional intelligence on that this is how it feels, right? When we have to cut people off, it hurts, right? And sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're down about that. It doesn't mean, right, that just because we feel this way that we still need to be in contact with people who are unsafe. And so this is just kind of one of those learning lessons that we just have to kind of unpack.
I like that, because I think sometimes we try to protect them too much,
Mm-hmm.
but they're experiencing it and they're old enough to know and understand. And
Right.
then also, I'd be mindful of having conversations at home when the child is present, because I've seen
Mm-hmm.
this with kids, especially if there's a toxic system.
Yeah.
That child is hearing and seeing more than y'all know. And so
Yeah.
just being very careful about the types of conversations that the child is exposed to. And when
Yeah.
co-parenting, never ever speaking negatively about the
Yeah.
other parent.
Yeah.
And so dealing with my own pain, my own feelings about the other person. And then when the child has an experience, it's like, hey, this happened. How did that make you feel? How are you going through
Mm-hmm.
that? Um, um, and letting that child form their own impression.
Yeah. One quick thing I want to mention, because this person also said it was hard for them to comprehend, just with children in general, and just with people in general. Sometimes they don't get it when you want them to, and we still have to. Emotions and feelings and people. Right, we live in a society where everything happens so quickly, but the reality of it is that sometimes it takes some time for people for people to grasp onto things, for our emotions to kind of pass through. And we have to be, this is the difficult thing for parents, is that we have to allow for that process to happen, for them to, I always compare it to like a glacier. You allow for that glacier to melt down slowly over time, right? It doesn't happen when we want it to, but quite often when we're patient with them, we plant, we water seeds. When they want to talk, we let them open up. They come to us, they dialogue. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. They might come back later, ask questions. We answer the questions, we dialogue. It might take longer than what you would like for it to happen. But then that's where we have to look inward, and we have to ask ourselves, what's making me feel uncomfortable about this situation? Why do I want my child to heal this quickly? Right? Is most of the time it's because you feel that their emotions are attached to your worthiness of a parent, on whether or not you are being a good parent. And the being a good parent is much more about the journey than it is about whether or not your child is happy all the time. The reality of it is that your child needs all of their emotions to get through life, all of them. And so we have to be prepared to be able to give them the structure and the instructions and teach them how to process all of them, even the ones that don't feel so good, right? And that's what parenting actually is like, rather than trying to push them and just hurry up and be happy, just be happy, just be happy. No, 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 no. Right? It's okay to be sad, right? It's okay to be upset. And as long as you need to take to process these emotions, right? We're here for you.
And I wanted to add, because someone mentioned that they know someone who talks bad about the kid's parent in front of them all the time, but the parent is rarely involved. And my response to that is that that parent is spreading their own pain and not giving that child, because that child isn't able to form their own impressions. And I have a lawyer on my side, a DFW divorce attorney, and she mentioned, because doing that, a parent doing that can come into court and negatively affect cases. And so I think it's really important that the child be able to form their own impressions, and that the parent not put their stuff on. Like, so if the child comes and is like, I really, my dad is this, if they're talking and saying these things, the parent shouldn't be joining in, co-signing, like, oh yeah, he's the worst. And because then y'all are talking more like peers, and this isn't the parent that's helping the child to regulate and cope and deal with that emotion. And someone else mentioned, what if I don't know how to grieve? And I think in our society, we don't really show that grief is a journey, that there are losses that I will grieve forever. I will continue to grieve, and everybody's journey looks a little bit different. But grief is about giving that pain a voice, giving that pain and letting myself feel a little bit of it. And so sometimes, do you have a book on your site already about grief? I don't know that I have.
Don't, not that I can think of, but a great resource. She's mainly on IG. She was on my podcast. Her name is Gina Mofa. So that's literally her. So she's currently writing a book, but she recommends a lot of different books. But she's more on the IG side. But she has some great, phenomenal resources, videos, and things of that nature on grief.
Yes, I found MOFFA. It looks like.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, this was great. Thank you very much for your time. We'll have to do it again. We'll have to do something. We might have to put together a webinar on gentle parenting, on parenting overall, and that sort of thing. So I think that would be
be cool. Yes.
And so, with that being said,